Hey, welcome to our channel, Sleepy Stories. Before starting today's story, please subscribe our channel and click the bell icon to get our every latest story. Today we share a heartbreaking story of love, loss, loneliness, and the hope that never dies. Where silence came to live, the old grandfather clock in the hallway struck 6. Its slow, steady chime echoed through the house before fading into a silence so complete that it almost seemed alive. Arthur Bennett opened his eyes before the last note disappeared. For a few seconds, he lay perfectly still beneath the faded quilt Evelyn had sewn nearly 30 years earlier. Morning sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, drawing pale golden lines across the bedroom floor. Dust floated lazily in the light, dancing where no one watched. Arthur turned his head toward the other side of the bed. The pillow was untouched. He still hadn't moved it. 3 years had passed since Evelyn died, yet her side of the bed remained exactly as she had left it. Her favorite lavender blanket was neatly folded at the foot of the mattress. Her reading glasses rested on the bedside table beside the novel she never finished. Arthur reached out and gently brushed the pillow with his fingertips. "Good morning, Evie," he whispered. The words disappeared into the empty room. He smiled anyway. That was how every morning began. Slowly, he pushed himself upright. His knees protested with familiar stiffness, and his back reminded him that 68 years carried a weight no medicine could erase. He waited a moment before standing, letting his body catch up with his determination. The floorboards creaked beneath each careful step. Once, those same boards had echoed with running feet. Michael racing down the hallway before school, Emma laughing as she chased the family dog, Evelyn calling from the kitchen, pretending to scold them while smiling too brightly to sound convincing. Now the only footsteps belonged to Arthur. He walked downstairs, one hand gliding along the polished banister he had built himself when they first bought the house. Every scratch in the wood held a memory. At the bottom of the stairs, the familiar scent of old timber and brewed coffee lingered faintly, though the coffee existed only in memory. Arthur filled the kettle and placed it on the stove. The whistle sounded far louder than it needed to. He poured hot water into a single mug. Years ago, he always prepared 2. For months after Evelyn's funeral, he had continued making her morning tea without thinking. Only after placing the second cup on the table would reality return, sharp and unforgiving. Eventually he stopped pouring the tea, but he never stopped setting the second coaster beside his own. Some habits were stronger than grief. Breakfast was simple: 2 slices of toast, 1 fried egg, half an apple. He ate slowly, looking out the kitchen window toward the maple tree Evelyn loved. Its branches swayed gently in the summer breeze. "I should trim those lower limbs," he murmured. Evelyn would have reminded him. She always remembered the little things. Arthur smiled at the thought before the smile quietly faded. The newspaper lay unopened. He no longer hurried to read the headlines. The world always seemed busy discussing things that felt very far away from an old man eating breakfast alone. Instead, he watched the neighborhood awaken. A school bus stopped at the corner. Children climbed aboard carrying oversized backpacks. Parents waved. Cars disappeared down the street. Life moved forward with remarkable confidence. Only Arthur seemed to remain standing still. After breakfast, he washed his plate immediately. Evelyn had always insisted that dishes should never wait until later. "You'll thank yourself tomorrow," she used to say. He still followed her advice, not because anyone would notice, because It made the house feel as though she still might. At 9 o'clock, Arthur stepped onto the front porch. The wooden swing creaked as he settled into it. Across the street, Mr. Dawson struggled with his recycling bin. Arthur walked over without hesitation. "Need a hand?" Mr. Dawson laughed. "I was hoping you wouldn't see me wrestling this thing." Hard to miss. Together they rolled the heavy bin to the curb. "Thanks, Arthur." "Anytime." They exchanged a few words about the weather before returning to their homes. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. It was the longest conversation Arthur would have all day. Back inside, the silence welcomed him once more. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that settled into furniture, lingered in hallways, and waited in every room. Arthur wandered into the living room. Family photographs covered the mantelpiece. There was Michael at age 8 holding his first baseball glove, Emma wearing braces and laughing with chocolate cake across her cheeks, a family vacation at the lake, Christmas mornings, graduations, anniversaries, 40 years, captured inside polished wooden frames. Arthur dusted each one carefully. "You're all getting dusty," he said softly. He wasn't talking to the pictures. He was talking to the people inside them. Around noon, the telephone rang. Arthur hurried across the room faster than his aching legs appreciated. His heart lifted. Maybe Michael, maybe Emma. He answered on the second ring. "Hello?" A cheerful recorded voice greeted him. "We're excited to tell you about our new insurance plan." Arthur listened for exactly 3 seconds before gently hanging up. For several moments he continued holding the receiver. The silence afterward somehow felt louder than before. He placed the phone back on its cradle. "It's all right," he whispered to no one. "They're probably busy." He said those words often. Busy, such a small word. Large enough to explain months without visits, years without holidays together, forgotten birthdays, missed promises. Busy. It had become the wall separating his children from their father. That evening, Arthur prepared beef stew. Enough for 4 people. Old habits refused to disappear. He set the dining table carefully. 4 plates, 4 glasses, 4 sets of silverware. The house looked alive again, just for a moment. At 6 o'clock, he lit the dining room candle. By 6:30, the food had begun to cool. By 7, the candle had burned halfway down. By 8, Arthur quietly carried 3 untouched plates back into the kitchen. He wrapped the leftovers in containers, tomorrow's dinner, perhaps the day after. He washed every dish by hand. Then he returned to the dining room. Only one chair remained pulled away from the table. His own. Arthur stood in the center of the room. The silence surrounded him like an old companion. This house had once been filled with music, arguments over board games, birthday songs, barking dogs, late-night conversations, and children's laughter echoing from one room to another. Now silence lived here. Not because the house had changed, because the people had. Arthur walked to the front door before bedtime. He switched on the porch light every night without fail. He knew no one was coming. Yet something deep inside him still believed that one evening a familiar car would pull into the driveway. A knock would come at the door. "Dad, we're home." Hope, he had learned, rarely listened to reason. He looked toward the empty street. The warm yellow light stretched across the porch steps and into the darkness beyond. Arthur smiled sadly. "I'll leave it on a little longer," he whispered. Then he waited. Just as he had yesterday, just as he would tomorrow. Because somewhere inside every lonely father lives a quiet promise. As long as the light is burning, Someone can always find their way home. Rain arrived before sunrise. Arthur woke to the gentle tapping of drops against the bedroom window. The sky outside was wrapped in thick gray clouds, and the morning light struggled to reach the room. For a moment, he remained beneath the quilt, listening. Evelyn had always loved rainy mornings. "They make the world slow down," she used to say. "People remember what's important when life gets quiet." Arthur smiled at the memory. "It certainly got quiet, Evie," he whispered. He dressed slowly, buttoning the same navy cardigan he wore nearly every day. It still carried the faint scent of cedar from the old wardrobe downstairs. Looking into the bedroom mirror, he noticed how much older he had become. His hair had turned almost completely white. Fine wrinkles framed his eyes, and his shoulders curved slightly from years of hard work. Evelyn used to tease him whenever he complained about getting older. "You'll always be the handsome carpenter who stole my heart at the county fair." He could almost hear her laughter. Downstairs, the kettle whistled as usual. Arthur made his tea and carried it to the living room instead of the kitchen. Rain blurred the neighborhood outside, making every house appear like a fading watercolor painting. His gaze drifted to the old oak cabinet standing against the wall. It had been years since he opened its bottom drawer. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps because he already knew what waited inside, or perhaps because memories had a way of hurting more than reality. After finishing his tea, Arthur walked to the cabinet and knelt carefully. His knees protested immediately. "Easy now," he muttered to himself. The drawer stuck halfway, just as it always had. He pulled harder until it slid open with a tired groan. Inside rested dozens of old photo albums, video cassettes, birthday cards, Christmas ornaments wrapped in newspaper, a tiny pair of pink baby shoes. Arthur reached for the smallest album. Dust covered its dark blue cover.
He brushed it away with the sleeve of his cardigan before carrying it to Evelyn's favorite armchair. Opening the first page felt like unlocking another lifetime. There she was, 19 years old, standing beneath a giant oak tree with sunlight dancing through her auburn hair. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was laughing at something Arthur had said moments before the picture was taken. He remembered exactly what it was. He had tripped over a tree root while trying to impress her. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped her ice cream. "I looked ridiculous," Arthur chuckled softly, "and you loved me anyway." He turned another page. Their wedding. Evelyn in a simple white dress her mother had sewn by hand. Arthur wearing a suit that was one size too big because it had belonged to his older brother. Neither of them had much money. Neither of them cared. Their smiles were enough. Arthur gently traced Evelyn's face with one trembling finger. "You were beautiful." The words escaped before he realized he had spoken aloud. Outside, thunder rolled across the distant hills. Inside, only the turning pages answered him. The next photographs showed the little house they had bought after 3 years of saving every spare dollar. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, peeling paint, leaky windows. But Arthur remembered Evelyn spinning around the empty living room, laughing. "It's perfect. We'll fill it with love." And they had. The album continued. Michael's first birthday, Emma asleep in Evelyn's arms, summer picnics, camping trips, school concerts, Christmas mornings surrounded by brightly wrapped presents that Arthur had stayed awake until midnight assembling. Every photograph carried a sound. Children laughing, Evelyn singing while baking apple pies, Michael shouting after hitting his first baseball, Emma practicing piano upstairs. Arthur realized something then. Silence hadn't always lived here. Once, this house had been louder than any place on the street. His attention shifted toward a stack of old VHS tapes resting beneath the albums. Small white labels covered each cassette. Michael, age 5, Emma's dance recital, Christmas 1999, family vacation. Arthur smiled. "I wonder if this old thing still works." The television in the corner still had a dusty VCR connected beneath it. He inserted the tape labeled Christmas 1999. For several seconds, the screen flickered with static. Then, life returned. A younger Arthur appeared on the television wearing a ridiculous red Santa hat while pretending to carry an oversized sack of presents. Evelyn laughed behind the camera. "You look nothing like Santa. I've got the belly for it." "No, dear, you certainly don't." Their laughter filled the room, real laughter, warm, unscripted, alive. Arthur leaned forward, tears gathered quietly in his eyes. Michael ran across the screen wearing striped pajamas. "Dad, can we open presents now?" Arthur, the younger version, looked dramatically at an imaginary watch. According to Santa law." Michael gasped. "There are laws?" "Oh yes." Emma tugged on Arthur's sleeve. "What do they say?" Arthur grinned. "They say children must first hug their mother." Both children tackled Evelyn in a burst of laughter. The camera shook as she tried to keep filming. "I can't breathe," she laughed. Watching the scene, Arthur covered his mouth with his hand. He had forgotten this moment, not because it wasn't important, because life had buried it beneath years of ordinary days. On the television, Evelyn suddenly turned the camera toward herself. Her bright green eyes sparkled. "If you're watching this years from now," she said with a smile, "I hope we're all together, probably laughing at how young we look." Arthur froze. The room became impossibly still. He stared at the screen long after the recording continued. Her words had crossed nearly 3 decades to find him. "We're not together anymore," he whispered, "but I'm still laughing at how young we were." The tape reached its end with a soft mechanical click. The television returned to blue static. Arthur didn't move. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, the echoes of yesterday lingered in every corner of the room. For the first time in years, the house no longer felt completely empty. It felt full of voices. Voices that belonged to another lifetime. Voices he feared he might someday forget. Arthur remained seated long after the television screen faded into silence. The rain tapped softly against the windows, as though the sky itself had decided to remember. He reached over and pressed the eject button. The cassette slid out with a quiet mechanical sigh. Arthur held it carefully, turning it over in his hands. The handwritten label, Christmas 1999, had begun to fade around the edges, but Evelyn's neat handwriting was unmistakable. She had labeled every memory, every birthday, every vacation, every ordinary afternoon she believed would someday become extraordinary simply because time would carry it away. "I suppose you were right," Arthur murmured. "You always did think ahead." He placed the tape back inside its worn plastic case before looking toward the staircase. There was one place he hadn't visited in years. The attic. He couldn't remember exactly when he'd closed its door for the last time. Only that, after Evelyn died, climbing those narrow steps had somehow become too difficult. Not for his knees, for his heart. The hallway seemed unusually quiet as Arthur stood beneath the small wooden hatch in the ceiling. A frayed rope hung within reach. He hesitated, then pulled. The folding ladder unfolded slowly, each hinge complaining louder than the last. Dust drifted downward like tiny snowflakes. Arthur smiled. "I'll take that as a welcome." Step by careful step he climbed upward. The attic smelled exactly as old attics should. Dry timber, cardboard, cedar, time itself. A single round window allowed soft gray daylight to spill across stacked boxes and forgotten furniture covered in white sheets. The rocking horse Michael had once insisted was a real stallion. Emma's dollhouse, missing one tiny blue door. An old Christmas tree wrapped in yellowing plastic. Nothing had moved. Nothing had changed. It was as though the attic had quietly agreed to protect the past until someone was ready to visit again. Arthur wasn't sure he ever had been, but here he was. He wandered slowly through the narrow pathways between boxes. Each one carried Evelyn's handwriting: kitchen, winter clothes, school projects, camping supplies. She had labeled everything. Arthur laughed softly. "You even organized memories." Near the far wall, behind an old cedar chest, something caught his eye. A small wooden box. Unlike the others, it had no label. It was tucked so carefully behind the chest that Arthur wondered whether anyone else had ever noticed it. He knelt slowly. The hinges squeaked as he lifted the lid. Inside lay a bundle of blue ribbons wrapped around several leather-bound journals. Beneath them rested a stack of children's drawings tied together with fading string, several folded letters, a cassette tape, and resting carefully on top, a small envelope. Arthur recognized the handwriting instantly. For Arthur, when you are ready. His fingers trembled. Evelyn. For a long while he simply stared. Opening it somehow felt like saying goodbye all over again, yet leaving it unopened suddenly seemed impossible. He unfolded the letter with the same care one might use to handle dried autumn leaves. My dearest Arthur, if you're reading this, then you've finally climbed into the attic. That means one of two things. Either I've convinced you to clean it, or I'm no longer there to remind you. Arthur smiled through damp eyes. That sounded exactly like her. The letter continued. You always said houses tell stories. You'd run your hand across a wall and somehow know where every beam belonged. But families tell stories too. The difference is that families leave them inside each other. If one person forgets, another remembers. Arthur paused. Outside, rain drummed gently against the attic window. Inside this box are little pieces of our life together. Michael's first drawing of our family, Emma's very first letter to you after she learned to write. The journals I kept whenever life felt too beautiful to trust my memory. Please don't let them stay hidden forever. One day our children may need these memories more than we ever did. Arthur lowered the letter. His vision blurred. She had written this years before becoming sick. Before hospitals, before whispered conversations doctors thought she couldn't hear. She had prepared for a future she hoped would never arrive. Arthur reached for the bundle of drawings. The first page showed 4 stick figures standing beneath an enormous yellow sun. One figure wore a tool belt. Another had bright orange hair. Above them, in crooked green crayon, Michael had written, My Family. The spelling made Arthur laugh aloud. On the back, Evelyn had written the date, age 5. Another picture showed Arthur building a birdhouse while Michael proudly held a crooked hammer almost as large as his arm. Arthur remembered that afternoon. Michael had driven exactly one nail, crooked, completely useless. Yet Arthur had refused to straighten it. It's perfect, he'd told him. Every carpenter starts somewhere. He wondered if Michael remembered. The doigt entre bal. The next bundle belonged to Emma. Tiny hearts decorated every page. Flowers, cats, rainbows. Then Arthur unfolded a single sheet of lined notebook paper. The handwriting was shaky. Some letters faced the wrong direction. At the top it read, Dear Daddy, thank you for making my bed when I was sick. Mommy says you stayed awake all night. When I grow up, I will take care of you too. Love, Emma. Arthur stopped breathing. He read the last sentence again, and again. When I grow up, I will take care of you too. His thumb rested gently against the paper. Not accusing, not bitter, only remembering. Children made promises with whole hearts. Adults sometimes forgot them beneath mortgages, meetings, deadlines, and calendars. He didn't blame Emma, not completely. Life had simply carried her farther away than either of them had intended. Beneath the letters lay one final cassette. Its label was different from the others. No date, only 3 words. Family message. Arthur frowned. I don't remember this. He carried the cassette downstairs. The old VCR accepted it with another tired click. Static filled the screen. Then, nothing. Only darkness. Arthur wondered if the tape had been damaged. Suddenly Evelyn's voice emerged. Not laughing, not filming Christmas morning, just speaking quietly. As usual, she said. Arthur forgot to check whether the camera lens cap was still on. Arthur chuckled despite himself. That sounds about right. The screen remained black. Then Michael's young voice interrupted. Dad, are you recording? I think so. You can't even see us. I'll figure it out. Emma giggled. You always say that. Another burst of laughter. The camera never captured a single image, only voices, footsteps, someone opening a cookie tin, a chair scraping across the kitchen floor, the family talking over one another, ordinary sounds, the kinds of sounds nobody thinks to preserve. Arthur closed his eyes. He wasn't watching anymore. He was there, back in the kitchen, Evelyn humming while washing dishes, Michael arguing that he wasn't sleepy, Emma asking for another bedtime story, the old clock chiming somewhere behind them. Life, simple, messy, perfect. After nearly 20 minutes, Evelyn's voice became softer. Arthur, If one day this house ever becomes quiet, it never will. It might. No. What if it does? Arthur laughed. Then we'll fill it with grandchildren. And if they live far away, they won't. And if life gets busy. There was a long silence. Then Arthur answered in a voice much younger than the one he carried today. Then you and I will wait. Another pause. Evelyn whispered something so quietly, the tape almost failed to capture it. As long as we're waiting together. The recording ended. The room fell silent once more. Arthur sat motionless, staring at the blank television screen. For years he had believed the silence in the house began when Evelyn died. Now he understood something different. Silence had not replaced the voices. It had simply learned to live beside them. The laughter was still here, the promises, the love, the ordinary moments that had quietly become extraordinary simply because they could never happen again. Arthur looked toward the dining room. 4 chairs surrounded the table. Tomorrow was Sunday. Without quite knowing why, he found himself counting the plates in the cupboard. 1 for him, 1 for Michael, 1 for Emma, 1 for whoever might still find their way home. Outside, the rain began to ease. A thin ribbon of sunlight broke through the clouds and touched the front porch. Arthur watched it in silence. Then, almost unconsciously, he whispered, "I think I'll make roast chicken tomorrow. Michael always liked roast chicken." He smiled. Hope, after all, was a habit, and some habits were stronger than time. Sunday arrived with a sky so clear it seemed as though the rain had washed every sorrow from the world. Arthur Bennett awoke before dawn, not because he had slept well, because Sundays had always begun early in the Bennett household. Long before the children stirred, Evelyn would be in the kitchen humming softly while tying her apron behind her back. Arthur would peel potatoes, pretending not to steal slices before they reached the pot. The smell of fresh coffee, baked bread, and roasting meat would drift upstairs, eventually pulling Michael and Emma from their beds. Those mornings had been wonderfully noisy. Now the house waited in silence. Arthur sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, listening to the familiar stillness. "Happy Sunday, Evie," he whispered toward the empty pillow. "I suppose we'd better get started." The kitchen felt colder than usual. Arthur filled the kettle and watched tiny bubbles gather along its bottom. He opened the old recipe book Evelyn had used for nearly 40 years. The pages had softened with age, their corners stained with butter, flour, and handwritten notes squeezed into every empty space. One recipe carried a small grease mark beside the title, Sunday roast with rosemary gravy. Next to it, Evelyn had written, "Michael likes extra carrots." A little farther down, "Emma always steals the crispy potatoes before dinner." Arthur smiled. Some recipes remembered more than ingredients. He ran his fingers over Evelyn's handwriting before gathering everything he needed. Potatoes, carrots, onions, fresh rosemary from the small garden behind the house. The roast had been sitting in the refrigerator since Friday. He bought it every week, just in case. The knife moved slowly beneath his weathered hands. Years spent shaping timber had left his movements steady, even if arthritis had stiffened his fingers. He peeled vegetables with patient care, placed them neatly into bowls, seasoned the meat exactly the way Evelyn had taught him. Not because he couldn't cook without the recipe, because following her instructions felt like spending another morning beside her. "Don't forget the garlic." Arthur chuckled. "I wasn't going to." He paused, then looked toward the doorway. For the briefest moment, he could almost imagine Evelyn standing there, wiping flour from her hands with the corner of her apron. The illusion disappeared as quickly as it came. Still, it had been comforting, though encore. By 9 o'clock, the aroma of roasting beef drifted through every room. The grandfather clock chimed. Arthur wiped the kitchen counter twice, though it was already clean. He checked the roast, adjusted the oven temperature by 5 degrees, looked at the clock again. There were still hours before lunch. He had always believed waiting became easier with age. Instead, it had become an art form. At 10:30, he climbed the stairs and opened the hallway closet. On the top shelf rested a neatly folded white tablecloth. Evelyn only used it on Sundays and holidays. Arthur carried it carefully to the dining room. The fabric settled across the table like fresh snow. He smoothed every wrinkle with the palm of his hand. Then came the plates. 4. The good china. Not the everyday dishes. Michael's place remained at the left side of the table. Emma's across from him. Arthur and Evelyn at each end. He never changed the arrangement. Changing it somehow felt like admitting the family no longer existed. He placed folded cloth napkins beside every plate, polished the silverware, filled 4 water glasses, even tucked a tiny sprig of rosemary beside each setting, just as Evelyn used to do. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with quiet activity. Families loaded children into cars after church. Neighbors greeted one another across driveways. Laughter floated through open windows. Arthur watched from behind the dining room curtain. A young father carried his sleeping son from the back seat of the car. The boy rested one small arm around his father's neck. Arthur smiled without realizing it. He remembered carrying Michael exactly that way after long Sunday picnics. Children always seemed heavier when they trusted you enough to fall asleep. At 11:45, Arthur checked his phone. No messages. He opened the contacts list. Michael. His thumb hovered over the name. He could call. It had been nearly 3 weeks. Perhaps Michael simply forgot today's Sunday. Perhaps work had swallowed another week before he noticed. Arthur pressed the call button. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then voicemail. Michael's cheerful recorded voice answered. "Hi, you've reached Michael Bennett. Sorry I missed your call. Leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can." Arthur waited for the beep. "Hello, son." He smiled as he spoke. "No hurry. I just thought I'd let you know I'm making your favorite roast today." He glanced toward the table. "It smells pretty good." Another pause. "I hope work isn't keeping you too busy." His voice softened. "Take care of yourself." He hesitated. "I miss you." Silence. Arthur cleared his throat. "Anyway, love you." He hung up before his voice had the chance to betray him.